I'm Dr. Andrew Perrin, a scholar of ancient Judaism and Christianity. Today, I'll walk you through understanding the at times confusing naming structure of the Dead Sea Scrolls. These manuscripts have a systematic structure for how they're named today. This can be a bit confusing, but it doesn't have to be. So why don't we walk through it and try to unlock and decode those names, as well as see a few Dead Sea Scrolls along the way. Before we dive in, it's important to know that a given Dead Sea Scroll can have up to 4 different titles or identifiers. First, we have ancient titles, which are rarely but sometimes included actually on the ancient manuscript. Second, and most common, we have an alphanumeric archival number system. Third, some texts might have a descriptive name that's applied to them related to that. And fourth, some texts also have modern scholarly designations. These are mostly for texts that we didn't know about before and have titles applied to them. Now let's break down some examples of all of these titles and see some scrolls in the process. Let's talk ancient titles. In some cases, we actually have scrolls where the original title is included on the manuscript itself. Examples like this are perhaps of the Hebrew War Scroll or the Aramaic Visions of Amram. These texts and others like it are incredibly important for us because they help us understand how an ancient scribe or other readers were understanding the type of text they were reading. This also gives modern scholars clues about the genre of a given text. Unfortunately, in most cases, the Dead Sea Scrolls are closer to Dead Sea Scraps and they're highly fragmentary, meaning we've lost major portions of a given text, in this case, ancient titles. When they do exist, they're helpful and fantastic, but when they don't, and in most cases, we need an organized and systematic way of describing and titling the Dead Sea Scrolls. So why don't we look at that alphanumeric archival system next? Most of the Dead Sea Scrolls will have an alphanumeric code that serves as their primary identifier. Take, for example, the Genesis manuscript known as 4Q6. Now, that first number 4 indicates the cave in which the text was discovered, or the text that was likely to have been discovered and it's associated with. I say that because not all of the scrolls were found in a controlled archaeological dig, meaning that sometimes we're not 100% certain that we have a likely understanding of where a given text originated. The second element is our site identifier. Now, in our example of 4Q6, that Q stands for Qumran, and this is the name given to the archaeological site off the northwest shore of the Dead Sea that was home to the ancient Jewish community that preserved and collected the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, at times you might also see another site identifier abbreviated in that position, like Mur for Muraba'at, Chev for Nachal Chever, Mas for Masada, and a few others like that. There were several other smaller sites like these that included textual discoveries, and these are often lumped together in the larger category of texts we refer to as the Dead Sea Scrolls. These texts and sites also show us that there's a larger history of textual discoveries and community activity in the Judean wilderness. The third element is that last number. In our example, 4Q6, that last number 6 is mostly an archival number. It's indicating that this is the 6th manuscript to be cataloged from this cave. Now, this does not necessarily reflect anything about the order of discovery or the importance of this particular text. So we put these pieces all back together, 4Q6, that serves almost like a unique identifier, something like a social security code or an email address, where only one manuscript, in this case a manuscript of Genesis from Qumran Cave 4, has that exact sequence and title. Before we look at the modern scholarly designations or descriptive titles for many of the Dead Sea Scrolls, I want to show you a few exceptions to the rule to that alphanumeric system that we just looked at. At times, particularly for some of the early discovered texts, we find additional letters tucked into that simple system that I just broke down for you. So for example, the Pesher Habakkuk scroll from Qumran Cave 1 is often referred to as 1QP-Hab, and that P tucked in there is a short form describing this as a Pesher text or an interpretive text. Right alongside of this in Qumran Cave 1, we have the community rule. This is just simply known as 1QS, where that S is actually a short form for a Hebrew word, serech, and that word means rule. This is a rule text. So you might come across certain examples, particularly early texts that don't fit that nice system that was developed later on, don't let this throw you off. Just try to decode what those are short forms for, and most of those other elements will still make sense. Let's look at our descriptive names. Now, our example of 4Q6 is also known by 4Q Genesis F or 4Q Gen F. We already know the 4 and the Q. This is from Qumran K4, and you've probably figured out already Genesis or Gen is pointing to the fact that this particular manuscript includes texts that we recognize as belonging to the book of Genesis from the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. Now that superscripted F is very important. This indicates this is the 6th Genesis manuscript from Qumran K4, with F being the 6th letter in the English alphabet. You might also see in some other texts other things tucked in there, like the text known as 4Q Paleo Exodus A. That word paleo is actually telling you something about the Hebrew of the text. It's written in a more ancient script known as Paleo Hebrew that's closer to ancient Phoenician. Other manuscripts like 4Q Genesis Exodus A, as you might have guessed, is telling you that that manuscript includes content from both Genesis and Exodus on the same material object. So when it comes to descriptive titles, you can decode most of them based on the elements we know about from the alphanumeric system, but it's really those superscripted characters that are telling you something important about this text, not unlike what we saw in our example 4Q6 or 4Q Genesis F. Now let's touch on those modern descriptive titles that might be given to a specific manuscript or an entire composition known by several other manuscripts. This is where things can get a little bit confusing because those titles can change over time, or a given scholar might refer to one work in a different way. So for example, the text known as 4Q Instruction is quite often referred to by the generic title Sapiential Work. More often, it's also referred to by the Hebrew title that's given to this text, Musar Lemivin. So when you're looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls, when we see those modern descriptive titles, sometimes they're capturing something very important about the text, but sometimes they're also reflecting how a given scholar or a certain point in Qumran research were understanding this text. This is not something to get confused by, and it also underscores the very important role that consistent and relatively stable alphanumeric system that we already learned plays in studying the Dead Sea Scrolls. So why does all of this matter? Well, with this crash course in the naming conventions of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you can now navigate through the entire collection on your own of some 930 ancient fragments and texts. This will help you then look up digital images online, maybe find a book or an article about a specific manuscript or text, as well as follow descriptions of the Dead Sea Scrolls in any publication. If you want to dive deeper into the world of the Dead Sea Scrolls, what they are, how they're found, what they say, and why they matter, I invite you to pick up a copy of my new book, Lost Words and Forgotten Worlds, Rediscovering the Dead Sea Scrolls. Thanks for watching. Please do like and subscribe, and I hope this guide helps you in your own journey through the world of the Dead Sea Scrolls.